I didn't realize something was wrong at first. Everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to. The white floral arch stood perfectly at the end of the aisle, soft petals catching the late afternoon light. Guests filled the rows of chairs, their voices blending into a warm, celebratory hum. Somewhere behind me, a violinist was playing something slow and delicate, elegant enough to make the whole moment feel carefully arranged, almost like a scene from a film. My granddaughter's wedding. I had imagined this day more times than I could count. I smoothed my hand over the fabric of my dress, taking a quiet breath before stepping further into the hall. No one stopped me. No one greeted me, either. It wasn't unusual, not really. People were busy. Weddings were always like this. Still, something felt slightly off. It wasn't anything I could name. Just a subtle shift in the way conversations seemed to pause a second too late when I walked by. A glance here. A whisper there. Nothing direct. Nothing obvious. I told myself I was imagining it. I adjusted the small name tag pinned neatly to my chest, more out of habit than necessity. And that was when I saw it. The old lady paying for everything. For a moment, I thought I had misread it. My eyes lingered on the words, tracing each letter slowly, as if they might rearrange themselves into something more appropriate if I just gave it enough time. But they didn't. The words stayed exactly as they were. Behind me, a soft laugh slipped through the air. Then another. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I mean, it's not wrong. Someone murmured, just loud enough. A second voice followed, lighter, amused. At least they're being honest. My fingers moved instinctively, brushing over the edge of the name tag, straightening it with careful precision. The motion was small, controlled, the kind of movement that didn't invite attention. Not that it mattered. They had already noticed. It's just a joke, my daughter-in-law said, her voice suddenly closer now, smooth and effortless, as if nothing about this moment required explanation. Don't be so dramatic. I turned my head slightly, just enough to meet her eyes. She was smiling. Of course she was. Around us, the room continued exactly as it had before, glasses clinking softly, conversations flowing, laughter rising and falling in gentle waves. Nothing had stopped. Nothing had changed, except that it had. I let my hand fall back to my side, the faintest nod of acknowledgement the only response I offered. Then I looked down at the name tag one more time. And this time, I read it carefully. Not quickly, not emotionally, carefully, as if understanding it fully mattered more than reacting to it. Because sometimes, what people choose to write down, when they think it's harmless, when they think it's funny, tells you far more than anything they would ever dare to say out loud. I didn't take the name tag off. Not immediately. My fingers had already brushed against it once, already felt the thin edge of the paper, the slight bend where it had been pressed too firmly into place. It would have been easy to remove. A simple motion. Quiet. Unnoticed. But I didn't. Instead, I let my hand fall back to my side, keeping my posture exactly the same as it had been before. Straight. Composed. Unhurried. If anyone was watching, there would be nothing to see. No reaction. No scene. Just an old woman standing where she was supposed to stand. Across the aisle, guests were beginning to settle into their seats. The soft murmur of conversation dipped and rose again, like nothing had happened. Like nothing had changed. But the laughter hadn't fully disappeared. It lingered. Not loud. Not obvious. Just quiet enough to be dismissed if you wanted to pretend it wasn't there. I didn't pretend. I turned slightly, just enough to take in the room without drawing attention to myself. A group of women near the second row leaned closer together, one of them covering her mouth as she whispered something that made the others smile. A man near the aisle glanced in my direction, then quickly looked away when our eyes almost met. No one said anything directly to me. They didn't have to. My gaze moved again, slower this time, more deliberate. It landed on my son. He was standing near the front, adjusting his cufflinks, his expression focused on something small, something insignificant. For a brief moment, I thought he might look up, that he might sense it, the shift in the room, the quiet undercurrent that hadn't been there before. But he didn't. He kept his eyes down, as if nothing unusual was happening, as if there was nothing to notice at all. A familiar feeling settled in my chest. Not sharp, not overwhelming, just heavy, the kind of weight that doesn't demand attention but doesn't leave, either. I had seen this before. Not like this. Not so obvious. But close enough. Small jokes that went a little too far. Comments that sounded harmless until you thought about them twice. Moments that could always be dismissed with the same simple sentence. It's just a joke. I shifted my attention again, this time toward my granddaughter. She stood near the arch, surrounded by her bridesmaids. Her dress catching the light with every small movement. She looked exactly the way she should on a day like this. Happy, radiant, untouched by anything that didn't belong to her moment. For a second, I wondered if she had seen it. If she had read the words. If she had heard the laughter that followed. But when one of her friends leaned in to say something, she laughed easily, without hesitation, without pause. If she knew, she didn't show it. And if she didn't know, I didn't finish the thought. Instead, I reached up again, slower this time, and adjusted the name tag once more. Not to remove it, just to straighten it. To make sure it sat exactly where it was meant to be. Visible. If they had gone to the trouble of writing it, of printing it, of placing it there for everyone to see, then it should be seen. Mom. My son's voice came from my left, closer now. I turned my head slightly. He gave me a quick smile, the kind that appears out of habit more than intention. You're early. I usually am, I said. He nodded, already half distracted, his attention drifting past me towards something, or someone else behind my shoulder. For a moment, I thought he might say something more. Ask something. Notice something. He didn't. His eyes flicked down, briefly, almost by accident, to the name tag. There was a pause. Small. Quick. But it was there. Then he looked back up. It's just something they put together last minute, he said, his tone light, casual, as if the explanation had already been decided before I ever asked for one. Don't read too much into it. I held his gaze for a second longer than necessary. I wasn't planning to, I replied. Another pause. Then he nodded again, relieved, as if something had just been resolved. Good, he said. We don't want any unnecessary stress today. Unnecessary. The words settled quietly between us. He gave my shoulder a brief pat. Gentle, familiar, distant, and then stepped away, already moving back toward the front, toward the place he belonged in this moment. Not beside me. I watched him go, my expression unchanged. Around me, the ceremony was beginning to take shape. Music shifted. Guests turned forward. Conversations softened into silence. Everything moving exactly as planned. Exactly as expected. I lowered my gaze once more, just for a moment. The words hadn't changed. Of course they hadn't. But something else had. Not in the room. Not in them. In me. Because it's one thing to hear a joke. It's another to realize that no one is actually laughing with you. The ceremony began exactly on time. It always does, when everything has been paid for in advance. The music shifted first, soft, deliberate, the kind of melody that signals people to stop talking without anyone having to say a word. Conversations dissolved into a careful silence. Chairs adjusted. Programs unfolded. I remained where I was for a moment longer before taking my seat. Front row. Left side. Exactly where my name had been printed on the seating chart weeks ago. Back, when everything still felt appropriate. I smoothed the fabric of my dress as I sat down, the motion slow, controlled. The name tag rested neatly against my chest, still visible, still readable to anyone who cared enough to look. I didn't hide it. Across the aisle, I noticed a woman glance at me, her eyes dropping briefly before lifting again, her lips pressing together as if she had almost said something but decided against it. That seemed to be the pattern. Almost. But never quite. The officiant stepped forward, his voice calm, practiced, filling the space with words about love and commitment. The kind of words people expect to hear. The kind that make a moment feel official, complete. I listened, but not entirely, because underneath those words, my mind had already begun to move elsewhere. Not to the insult, not to the laughter, but to something far more practical. Numbers, details, arrangements. It's a strange thing, what your mind chooses to focus on when something doesn't sit right. For me, it has always been this. Clarity. I let my gaze lower slightly, not enough to seem distracted, just enough to create a quiet space for thought. The venue. Booked under my name. Not theirs. The initial deposit had been handled months ago. The larger portion settled shortly after. There had been a final installment scheduled, standard procedure, nothing unusual. Due at the end of the event. Not before. That had been my decision. At the time, it felt reasonable, flexible, helpful. Now it felt interesting. A small detail. But details matter. I shifted slightly in my seat, crossing one hand over the other in my lap, my fingers resting lightly against the cool surface of my clutch. Inside it, neatly organized, were copies of everything I might need. Receipts, confirmations, contacts. I don't like uncertainty, so I don't leave room for it. A soft movement at the front of the aisle drew my attention back. My granddaughter had begun her walk. For a moment, everything else faded. She looked beautiful. There's no other word for it. The kind of beauty that doesn't come from the dress or the setting, but from the way she carried herself. Light, hopeful, unaware of anything beyond the moment in front of her. I watched her take each step carefully, her eyes fixed ahead, her expression open and certain. And for a brief second, something inside me softened. Because whatever this was, whatever had been said, whatever had been done, this day was still hers. That mattered. It always had. But even as that thought settled, something else followed it. Quiet, measured, unavoidable. Respect matters too. The vows began. Promises spoken clearly, confidently, repeated line by line. Words about partnership, about trust, about standing beside one another, not just when it's easy, but when it isn't. I listened more closely this time. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. Because sometimes, the things people promise in front of everyone else reveal more than the things they say in private. My gaze lifted slightly, just enough to take in the faces around me. Guests leaned forward, attentive, some smiling, some already emotional. A few discreetly wiped at their eyes. The atmosphere had shifted again, softer now, more sincere. As if the earlier laughter had never existed. As if the words on my chest were just invisible. I wondered, briefly, if that was how it worked for them. If ignoring something made it disappear. If silence turned intention into accident. My fingers moved again, almost unconsciously, brushing once more against the edge of the name tag. Still there. Of course it was. I let my hand fall back into my lap. The officiant spoke again, guiding them toward the next step. Rings. Commitment. A future built together. And as I watched my granddaughter extend her hand, steady and trusting, I found myself thinking, not about the ceremony, not about the guests, not even about the moment unfolding in front of me, but about something much simpler. Something far less visible. Responsibility. Who carries it? Who assumes it? And who takes it for granted? Because it's one thing to offer support, to give, to make something possible. It's another thing entirely to realize. You were never seen as anything more than the reason it could happen. Applause came before the moment fully settled. It always does. The officiant hadn't even stepped back yet when the first wave of clapping began. Quick, eager, almost relieved. The kind of reaction people give when everything has gone exactly the way it was supposed to. The ceremony was over. The marriage, official. And just like that, the room shifted again. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Conversations returned in low, excited tones. Someone laughed too loudly near the aisle, quickly lowering their voice when others turned. I remained seated for a second longer than necessary. Not because I needed to, but because I preferred to move when I chose to, not when the room expected me to. When I finally stood, I did so slowly, smoothing the front of my dress with the same careful precision I had maintained all afternoon. The name tag stayed exactly where it was, catching the light just enough to remain noticeable without demanding attention. Visible, but never addressed. Guests began moving toward the reception area, forming small clusters along the way. Congratulations were exchanged. Compliments repeated. The same phrases, over and over again, each one sounding slightly less personal than the last. Beautiful ceremony. They looked so happy. It was perfect. Perfect. I stepped into the flow of people, letting it carry me forward without resistance. A server passed by with a tray of champagne, the glasses catching the soft glow of the overhead lights. I reached for one, not because I wanted it, but because it gave my hand something to do. Careful, a voice said lightly from my right. We wouldn't want you spilling anything after covering the whole event. A small ripple of laughter followed. I turned my head just enough to acknowledge them. 3 women, well-dressed, relaxed, comfortable in a way that suggested they felt entirely at ease with what they had just said. I didn't recognize them. They recognized me. Of course they did. I'll manage, I replied, my tone even measured. One of them tilted her head slightly, studying me as if trying to decide whether I was serious or not. Oh, I'm sure you will, she said. You've managed everything else, haven't you? Another laugh. Softer this time. More contained. But still there. I held her gaze for a brief moment, then let it go. There was nothing to gain from extending it. No point in correcting something that had already been decided for me. People rarely change their understanding in the middle of a celebration. They prefer the version that keeps things simple. I took a small sip from the glass, the taste barely registering before I lowered it again. Around us, the reception space had fully come to life now. Music playing, servers moving in practiced patterns, guests finding their places with the quiet confidence of people who knew they belonged there. Belonging. It's an interesting thing. Sometimes, it has very little to do with where you're standing. Mom. My son again. Closer this time. I turned, meeting him halfway. They're about to start the speeches, he said. You should come sit at the main table. Should. Not we'd like you to. Not, we saved you a seat. Just should. I glanced past him toward the table in question. It was set slightly apart from the others, decorated more elaborately, positioned to be seen from every angle in the room. Reserved for family. Important family. My eyes moved across the place cards, reading them one by one. His name. Her parents. Bridesmaids. Groomsmen. I didn't see mine. Not at first. Then, near the end, slightly off to the side, there it was. Not quite centered. Not quite aligned with the others. But present. In the same neat print. In the same careful design. I stepped closer, just enough to confirm what I had already seen from a distance. And then, without thinking, my gaze dropped, briefly, instinctively, to my chest. The name tag. The two versions of me. One formal, one not. It's a bit tight on space, my son said quickly, following my line of sight. But everyone important is up there. Important. I let the word settle, just as I had before. Quietly. Without resistance. I see, I said. He nodded, relieved again. Always relieved when things didn't turn into something more complicated. We'll start in a minute, he added. Just stay nearby, okay? Stay nearby? Not sit. Not join. Just remain within reach. I will, I said. He gave me another brief smile, already turning away before the moment had fully finished. Always moving. Always elsewhere. I stood there for a moment longer, the glass still in my hand, the noise of the room rising steadily around me. Then, slowly, I exhaled. Not sharply. Not dramatically. Just enough to release something small. Something that had been building, quietly, piece by piece. Because by now, it wasn't just the name tag. It wasn't just the laughter. It wasn't even the words. It was the pattern. Clear. Consistent. Carefully maintained. And once you see a pattern clearly enough, you don't need anyone to explain it to you anymore. I didn't go to the main table. Not right away. Instead, I stepped slightly to the side, just enough to be out of the direct flow of people moving toward their seats. From there, I could see everything clearly without being part of it. The room had settled into its next rhythm. Glasses filled. Chairs pulled in. Conversations layered over the soft background music, creating that familiar sound of a celebration finding its pace. On the surface, everything worked. It always does, when enough attention and enough money has gone into making sure it does. I let my gaze return to the main table. They were gathering now. My granddaughter sat at the center, radiant, leaning slightly toward her husband, as someone said something that made her smile. Her parents took their places beside her, their posture relaxed, their presence natural, unquestioned. My son moved easily among them, adjusting a chair here, exchanging a few quick words there. He looked comfortable, exactly where he belonged. I watched for a moment longer than I needed to. Then I looked down again. The name tag. Still neat. Still perfectly in place. The old lady paying for everything. There was something almost efficient about it. Not cruel in an obvious way. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just accurate. At least, accurate in the way they had chosen to define me. I turned slightly as a server passed by again, this time carrying a tray of plated appetizers. The movement caught my attention, not because of the food, but because of the coordination behind it. Timing. Sequence. Execution. Everything had been planned carefully. I knew that because I had been part of that planning. The tasting sessions. The menu selections. The discussions about portions, presentation, pacing. I had sat through all of it. Not because I insisted, but because they had asked. At the time, it had felt like inclusion. Now it felt like something else. Something more functional. Excuse me. I spoke quietly, just as the event manager passed within reach. She turned immediately, professional, attentive. Yes, ma'am. Her tone was respectful, neutral, the way it should be. I wanted to confirm something, I said, keeping my voice calm, conversational. The final settlement for today, when is that processed? She didn't hesitate. At the end of the reception, ma'am. As per the agreement. As per the agreement. Exactly. And it hasn't been processed yet. No, ma'am. Not yet. I gave a small nod. Good, I said. She offered a polite smile, waiting, just for a second, as if expecting a follow-up question. There wasn't one. That will be all, I added. Of course, she said, and moved on without another word. I watched her go, noting the efficiency in her steps, the way she moved from one task to the next without interruption. Everything here depended on timing, on completion, on things being finished the way they were intended to be finished. I shifted my attention back to the room. The first speech was about to begin. Someone tapped lightly against a glass, the soft ringing sound cutting through the conversations just enough to gather attention. Guests turned, voices lowered. My son stood, straightening slightly as he reached for the microphone. He looked confident, prepared. I'd like to say a few words, he began, his voice carrying easily across the room. Of course he would. This was his moment too. He spoke about family, about love, about support, about everything that had brought them to this day. The words were well chosen, carefully arranged, the kind of speech that sounded sincere because it followed all the right patterns. I listened, fully this time, because I wanted to hear exactly how the story would be told. And we couldn't have done any of this without the people who stood by us, he continued. A small pause, a glance around the room. Names began to follow. Her parents, close friends, people who had helped, who had been there, who had made this possible. Each one acknowledged, each one appreciated, each one seen. I waited, not impatiently, not expectantly, just waiting, because sometimes it's not about needing to be mentioned. It's about noticing when you aren't. The list ended. The applause came easily, warmly, wrapping around the moment in exactly the way it was meant to. My son smiled, satisfied, stepping back from the microphone as he returned to his seat. And just like that, it was complete. No hesitation, no correction, no glance in my direction. Nothing. I lowered my eyes slightly, not enough to draw attention, just enough to let the moment pass without being forced to hold it longer than necessary. The pattern, again, clear, consistent, and now, undeniable. I reached up, this time not to adjust the name tag, but to touch it, briefly, deliberately, as if confirming something I already knew, because by now, there was no confusion left, no misunderstanding, no need to question intention. When someone shows you exactly who you are to them, not once, but repeatedly, at some point, you stop wondering if they mean it, and you start deciding what to do with that information. The applause faded, but the room didn't slow down. It never really does after a speech like that. Music rose again, slightly louder this time, filling the gaps between conversations, smoothing over anything that might have felt incomplete. Glasses were lifted. Servers moved in steady patterns, placing dishes, clearing space, keeping everything flowing exactly as planned. I remained where I was, not at the main table, not quite with the other guests either, just nearby, exactly as I had been told. From where I stood, I could see the entire room without obstruction. The kind of position that lets you notice things people don't expect you to notice. Small things, details, like the way the event manager checked her watch every few minutes, her eyes briefly scanning the room before moving on, or the way one of the servers leaned toward her, whispering something quickly, receiving a short nod in response before adjusting direction. Timing again. Sequence. Everything moving toward a specific point. I let my gaze drift, following those movements without appearing to. Years ago, I learned that if you stay still long enough, people stop accounting for you. You become part of the background. And from the background, you see more. Another server passed, this time pausing near the side station to check a clipboard. My attention shifted, not to the food, not to the guests, but to the paper in her hand. A printed schedule, columns of time slots, marked checkpoints. I didn't need to read it to understand it. I had seen versions of it before, during planning, during confirmations, during those quiet meetings where details were discussed in terms of precision, not emotion. I took a slow step forward, just enough to close the distance without interrupting anything. Not close enough to draw attention, just close enough to confirm what I already suspected. The final segment. Marked clearly. End of reception. Settlement. The word wasn't large. It didn't need to be. It sat there the way important things often do, quietly, without decoration, assuming it would be understood by the people who needed to understand it. I let my eyes move away before anyone noticed where they had been. Nothing had changed. Not yet. But now, everything was defined. Behind me, laughter rose again, this time louder, more relaxed. The kind of laughter that comes when people feel certain that the evening will continue exactly as expected. No interruptions. No surprises. Just celebration. I turned slightly, my gaze catching a familiar figure approaching. My daughter-in-law. She moved with the same easy confidence she had carried all afternoon, a glass in her hand, her expression light, composed. As if the earlier moment had never happened. As if there had been no reason for it to matter. "Why are you standing all the way over here?" she asked, her tone casual, almost friendly. "You should be up front. You know, where family sits." I held her gaze for a moment. "Your son said to stay nearby," I replied. She gave a small laugh, dismissive but controlled. "He worries too much. It's your day too, in a way." In a way. I let the phrase settle. She took a small sip from her glass, her eyes flicking briefly, not to my face, but downward. To the name tag. There it was again. That quick pause. That almost reaction. And then, just as quickly, it disappeared. "You're taking it very seriously," she added, her voice lowering slightly, as if sharing something private. "It was just meant to be funny." "Was it?" I asked. Not sharply, not confrontationally, just clearly. She tilted her head, studying me for a second, as if deciding how much honesty the moment required. "People like to keep things light at weddings," she said. "No need to overthink it." Overthink. Another familiar word. I nodded once. "Of course," I said, because arguing would change nothing, and agreeing changed even less. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. The music filled the space between us, soft but steady, carrying the conversation forward without needing either of us to continue it. Then she smiled again, that same composed, practiced smile, and stepped back. "I should get back," she said. "They'll start the next round soon." Next round. Another phase. Another step in the sequence. "Enjoy the evening," she added, already turning away. "I intend to," I said. She didn't look back. I watched her return to the main table, slipping easily into place, her presence blending seamlessly into the group. No hesitation. No uncertainty. As if everything was exactly where it should be. I let my gaze follow her for a moment longer. Then I looked down once more. The name tag hadn't moved. The words hadn't changed. But the meaning had settled into something far more solid now. Not just an insult. Not just a joke. A definition. Simple. Efficient. Convenient. I reached into my clutch, my fingers brushing against the edge of a folded document before closing lightly around my phone instead. I didn't take it out. Not yet. There was no need to rush. Because when everything around you is built on timing, the only thing that matters is choosing the right moment to act. The second round of speeches began without announcement. No one needed one. By then, the room already understood the rhythm, when to quiet down, when to listen, when to respond. It moved almost automatically, guided by expectation more than instruction. I stayed where I was, still not at the main table, still exactly nearby. From this distance, the details became clearer in a different way. Not louder, not sharper, just easier to place into context. A bridesmaid stood up first, lifting her glass with a bright, confident smile. Her voice carried easily, practiced but not stiff. She spoke about friendship, about memories, about the bride's kindness, her laughter, her future. The room responded exactly as it should. Smiles, nods, soft laughter at the right moments. It all worked. Because it was supposed to. I listened, but not to the words alone. To the structure. To the pattern. Because once you start noticing patterns, it becomes difficult to stop. Each story had a purpose. Each name had a place. Each acknowledgement followed an unspoken order. Who mattered, who contributed, who deserved to be seen. And again, I noticed where I wasn't. Not mentioned. Not implied. Not even indirectly included in the space between sentences. Just absent. My fingers rested lightly against the edge of my clutch, feeling the smooth surface beneath them, grounding myself in something physical, something controlled. Across the room, a server moved quickly toward the side station, speaking in a low voice to the event manager again. This time, the response was shorter, more direct. A nod, a glance toward the main table, then toward the bar. Timing. Sequence. We were getting closer to something. I didn't need to check the schedule again. I could feel it. The transition point, where planning shifts into execution, where intention becomes action. Another speech ended. Applause followed, slightly louder now, as the room grew more relaxed, more comfortable in the rhythm of celebration. A groomsman took the microphone next, his tone lighter, more casual, drawing easy laughter from the crowd. The kind of speech that doesn't try too hard, that relies on familiarity instead of structure. It worked. Of course it did. People prefer what feels effortless. I let my gaze drift again, not focusing on him, but on the movement around the room. The bar staff adjusting bottles. The kitchen doors opening and closing in steady intervals. The event manager checking her watch again, this time holding the glance a fraction longer. We were close. Very close. My hand slipped into my clutch once more, this time resting more firmly against my phone. Still inside. Still untouched. But no longer an afterthought. I thought about the agreement again. The final installment. Pending. Unprocessed. Dependent on a single confirmation. A single action. Small. Simple. Final. Are you enjoying yourself? The voice came from behind me. I turned slightly. One of the earlier women, the ones who had laughed, stood there again, her expression open, curious in a way that didn't quite reach sincerity. I am, I said. She glanced briefly at my name tag, then back to my face, her smile tightening just enough to suggest she was aware of it, even if she wouldn't say so directly. It's a beautiful event, she added. Very generous. Generous. I nodded once. It is, I replied. She seemed to wait, as if expecting something more, agreement, elaboration, maybe even gratitude for the observation. I offered none. After a second, she gave a small, polite laugh, the kind people use to fill space when they're not sure what else to do. Well, she said, I suppose nights like this don't happen without someone making them happen. No, I said quietly. They don't. Our eyes met for a brief moment, long enough for the meaning to settle, short enough to remain unspoken. She looked away first. Enjoy the rest of the evening, she said quickly, already stepping back. I will, I answered. Again, the same words. But this time, they carried something slightly different. Not promise, not reassurance, something closer to decision. I watched her leave, her attention already shifting back to the group she had come from. Easy, uncomplicated, unaffected. I let my gaze return to the front of the room. Another speech was ending. More applause, more movement, more progression toward the next stage. The event manager stepped closer to the main table now, speaking briefly with one of the coordinators. A quick exchange, a short nod, confirmation. That was all it would take. I finally took my phone out. Slowly, deliberately. The screen lit up in my hand, the soft glow almost unnoticeable against the ambient lighting of the room. No one was looking at me. No one was paying attention. Why would they? I was just nearby. I opened the message thread, scrolled once, stopped. The contact name was exactly where it had always been, the one responsible for final authorization. I didn't press anything. Not yet. Because timing isn't just about knowing what to do. It's about knowing exactly when to do it. And as I stood there, the noise of the room rising and falling around me, the laughter, the music, the carefully maintained illusion of everything being exactly as it should, I realized something simple. They had already decided who I was in this story. They had written it, printed it, pinned it to my chest for everyone to read. All that was left now was for me to decide how it would end. I didn't move right away. The phone remained in my hand, the screen dimming slightly as the room continued around me, unchanged. Laughter rose again from the main table. Glasses touched. Someone called for another round. Everything was still working, exactly as they expected. I lifted my eyes from the screen and looked across the room one more time, not searching for anything new, just confirming what I had already seen. My granddaughter leaned toward her husband, smiling at something he said. Her expression was open, unguarded, untouched by anything outside the small circle around her. My son sat beside her, relaxed now, his earlier tension gone. Whatever he had needed to say, he had already said it. Whatever he had needed to acknowledge, He had chosen not to. And my daughter-in-law, she was laughing. Not loudly, not carelessly, just enough to belong perfectly to the moment. I let that image settle. Not as judgment, not even as disappointment. Just clarity. Because by now, there was nothing left to question. The room had defined everything for me. I lowered my gaze again, this time not to the name tag, but to the phone in my hand. The message thread was still open. The contact still waiting. All it would take was one sentence. One confirmation. One decision. My thumb hovered over the screen, not hesitating, just measuring. Behind me, a chair scraped softly. A server moved past, the faint scent of wine and polished glass trailing behind her. Somewhere near the bar, someone laughed too loudly again, quickly correcting themselves when a few heads turned. The event manager stepped into view, her attention sharper now, her movements more precise. She checked her watch again, then glanced toward the main table, then toward the side station. The sequence was aligning. This was the moment everything depended on. I took a slow breath. Not deep, not dramatic, just enough. And then, without shifting my posture, without drawing even the slightest attention, I typed, "Please hold the final payment. Do not process without my direct confirmation." I read it once, not to reconsider, just to ensure it said exactly what it needed to say. Clear, unemotional, final. Then I pressed send. The message disappeared from my screen, replaced by a quiet confirmation that it had been delivered. Nothing around me changed. No sudden reaction. No visible consequence. Of course not. That's not how these things work. Not immediately. I locked the phone and let it rest in my hand for a second longer before slipping it back into my clutch. The motion was small, contained, indistinguishable from any other. Invisible, just like everything else had been. I lifted my head again. The speeches had ended. Music shifted once more, transitioning into something softer, more fluid. Guests began to move, some toward the dance floor, others toward the bar, the energy loosening, expanding into the next phase of the evening. It looked effortless, seamless, as if the entire event had been designed to continue indefinitely without interruption. But I knew better. Every system has a point it relies on, a final piece that holds everything together. And tonight, that piece was mine. I reached up slowly, my fingers brushing against the edge of the name tag again. This time, I didn't adjust it. I didn't straighten it. I simply touched it, long enough to acknowledge it. The old lady paying for everything. The words felt different now. Not heavier, not lighter, just accurate in a way they hadn't intended. Because they weren't wrong. I had paid for everything. Up until this moment. My hand lowered again, resting calmly at my side. Across the room, the event manager was speaking quietly into her headset now. Her expression still controlled, still professional, but tighter, just slightly. She had noticed something. Not the cause. Not yet. But the shift. It always starts that way. Small. Subtle. Barely visible. I watched her for a moment, then let my gaze move on. There was no need to focus on it. No need to anticipate the exact second it would become obvious. Because that wasn't the point. The point wasn't to create a scene. It wasn't to interrupt the wedding. It wasn't even to be seen. It was simply to stop. To stop being what they had decided I was. To stop fulfilling a role I had never agreed to play. Around me, the music grew louder, the laughter more relaxed, the evening continuing exactly as it had been designed to. For now, I stood there, still and composed, just another figure in the room, just another guest among many. Nothing had changed. Not yet. But it would. And when it did, it wouldn't be because I made a scene. It would be because I chose not to continue on. For a while, nothing happened. The music continued. Guests moved easily between tables and the dance floor, laughter rising and falling in soft waves. Glasses were refilled. Conversations overlapped. The kind of seamless flow that makes an evening feel effortless, untouched. Exactly as it had been designed. I didn't check my phone. There was no need to. I already knew the message had been received. And more importantly, I knew what would follow. Not immediately, not dramatically, but in small, controlled interruptions. That's how systems react when something essential is missing. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The first sign was easy to miss. A server approached the bar, spoke quietly to the bartender. The bartender nodded, then reached for something beneath the counter, checking, adjusting, pausing just a fraction longer than necessary before continuing. From a distance, it looked like nothing. Up close, it was hesitation. I noticed, because I was watching. A few minutes later, another shift. Near the kitchen doors, one of the staff members stepped out, scanning the room before walking directly toward the event manager. Their exchange was brief, low voices, minimal gestures. But this time, the manager didn't just nod. She frowned, just slightly. Then she checked her watch again. Longer this time. Still controlled. Still professional. But no longer effortless. I remained where I was, my posture unchanged, my expression neutral. Around me, the guests hadn't noticed anything yet. Why would they? Everything still looked intact. But the timing was beginning to slip. Not enough to disrupt. Just enough to delay. A tray of drinks arrived a little later than expected. A server hesitated before placing it down, glancing briefly toward the manager before stepping back. At the main table, my daughter-in-law lifted her glass, then paused, noticing something I couldn't quite hear. She leaned toward one of the staff, her smile tightening just enough to suggest a question. The answer must not have satisfied her. Her eyes moved. Across the room. Not directly to me. Not yet. But searching. Trying to place something that didn't quite fit. I watched the shift happen in real time. Subtle. Gradual. Unavoidable. Another few minutes passed. The music continued, but someone adjusted the volume, slightly lower, as if compensating for something else. Near the bar, a small line had formed. Guests waited, patient at first, then exchanging brief glances as the pace slowed. Not stopped, just slower. The kind of delay that doesn't cause concern immediately, but plants a question. And questions, once they begin, don't stay contained for long. The event manager moved again, this time with more intention. She spoke to two different staff members in quick succession, her tone still calm, but her movements sharper now, more precise. She wasn't reacting to a problem. Not yet. She was trying to prevent one. But prevention requires control. And control requires certainty. And certainty requires completion. My gaze shifted briefly to the main table again. My son was speaking to someone on his left, his expression relaxed, unaware. My granddaughter was still smiling, still engaged, still exactly where she should be. For a moment, I let myself look at her properly. Not as part of the scene, but as herself. Because none of this was hers. Not really. Then I looked away. Because intention doesn't change outcome. Another delay. This one slightly more visible. A course that should have arrived didn't. Not on time. Guests began to notice. Not openly. Not loudly. But enough. Heads turned. Small conversations shifted. The rhythm interrupted. Across the room, my daughter-in-law stood. That was new. She spoke quickly to a staff member, her expression still composed, but the edges tighter now, the ease beginning to fade. She asked something. The staff member hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because hesitation, in a room like this, is louder than any announcement. Her eyes moved again. This time, more directly. Scanning. Connecting. Looking for the one variable that hadn't been accounted for. I didn't move. I didn't look away. I simply remained where I had always been. Nearby. Visible. Unaddressed. For a brief moment, our eyes almost met. Almost. Then she turned back to the staff, her voice lower now, more controlled, more urgent. The event manager approached her within seconds. That hadn't happened before. Not like this. They spoke quietly, but the tone had changed. Less coordination. More explanation. More uncertainty. And that's when it became clear. Not to everyone. Not all at once. But to the people who needed to understand, something was wrong. Not broken. Not failed. Just incomplete. And in a system built on completion, incomplete is enough. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. For a few more minutes, the room tried to continue as if nothing had changed. Music played. Guests stayed in their seats. Conversations carried on, softer now, more uncertain, but still present. But the rhythm was gone. Not completely, just enough to be felt. At the bar, the line had grown longer. The bartender moved more slowly now, pausing between orders, glancing more often toward the event manager than toward the guests in front of him. Near the kitchen doors, two servers stood closer than before, speaking in low voices, their movements less fluid, less automatic. And at the main table, they had noticed. My daughter-in-law was no longer sitting. She stood beside her chair, her posture straight, her expression carefully controlled in a way that only made the tension more visible. One hand rested lightly on the back of the chair, the other gesturing in small, precise movements as she spoke to the event manager. Not laughing anymore. Not relaxed. My son had turned toward them now, his attention fully engaged, his earlier ease replaced by something sharper. He said something, short, direct. A question. The kind that expects an immediate answer. The manager responded. Calmly. Professionally. But not confidently. That was the difference. Even from across the room, it was clear. Because confidence doesn't hesitate. And she did. Only for a second. But in a room like this, a second is enough. I remained where I was, my posture unchanged, my hands resting lightly at my sides. No one had approached me. No one had asked anything. Not yet. But the awareness was spreading. Table by table. Conversation by conversation. Small delays turned into noticeable pauses. Noticeable pauses turned into quiet questions. Is everything okay? Are they bringing the next course? Why is it taking so long? Nothing loud. Nothing disruptive. Just enough. Just enough to shift the atmosphere from certainty to doubt. The music lowered again, almost imperceptibly, as if someone had adjusted it without drawing attention. The space it left behind wasn't empty. It was filled with something else. Uncertainty. At the main table, my daughter-in-law turned slightly, her eyes scanning the room more openly now. Not searching for staff. Searching for answers. Her gaze passed over groups of guests, over the bar, over the dance floor. And then, finally, it stopped. On me. There was no immediate reaction. No sudden expression. Just a pause. A moment where something aligned. Not fully, but enough. She said something to my son. Quietly. He followed her gaze. And for the first time that evening, he looked directly at me. Not past me. Not around me. At me. The recognition was immediate. Not confusion. Not surprise. Recognition. As if a piece of a puzzle had just fallen into place. He said something back to her, shorter this time. More certain. Then he stepped away from the table. My daughter-in-law didn't follow. She stayed where she was, her posture unchanged, but her attention fixed now, watching, waiting. My son began walking toward me. Not quickly, but not casually either. There was intention in his steps now. Purpose. The kind that only appears when something needs to be addressed. Around him, the room continued its quiet shift. Conversations lowered as he passed. A few heads turned, sensing movement, sensing direction. People notice more than they admit, even when they don't understand what they're noticing. I didn't move. I didn't adjust my posture. I didn't reach for my phone. I simply waited. Because this part was inevitable. He stopped a few feet in front of me, close enough to speak without raising his voice. Close enough that the distance between us felt deliberate. Mom, he said. Just that. No smile. No casual tone. I met his gaze. Yes. There was a brief pause. Not hesitation. More like recalibration. As if he was deciding how direct he needed to be. There seems to be an issue, he said finally. With the payment. Of course there was. I didn't react. Not visibly. What kind of issue? I asked. His eyes searched mine for a second, as if trying to determine whether I already knew the answer. They're saying the final settlement hasn't gone through, he replied. That it's on hold. On hold. Such a simple phrase. So easy to say. So difficult to ignore. I nodded once. I see. Another pause. This one slightly longer. Did you authorize that? He asked. There it was. Not an accusation. Not yet. Just a question. Carefully placed. I held his gaze, steady, calm, giving the moment exactly the weight it deserved. Yes, I said. No explanation. No elaboration. Just the truth. His expression didn't change immediately, but something behind it did. A shift. Small, but unmistakable. Because in that moment, he understood something he hadn't needed to understand before. That this wasn't an accident. And for the first time that evening, the story they had written was no longer entirely theirs to control. He didn't respond right away. For a second, he just stood there, looking at me as if the answer he had received didn't quite match the version of the evening he had expected to have. Around us, the room continued its quiet unraveling. Not loud, not chaotic, just increasingly difficult to ignore. At the bar, a guest set an empty glass down with a little more force than necessary. Near the back, someone leaned toward a server, asking something that required more than a simple answer. And at the main table, My daughter-in-law was still watching. Not pretending anymore. Not laughing. Just watching. Why? My son asked finally. The word came out low, controlled, but no longer casual. I held his gaze. Why do you think? I replied. Not sharp. Not emotional. Just direct. His expression tightened slightly. The question he had asked turning inward now, searching for something he might have missed. For a moment, he glanced past me, as if the answer might be somewhere else in the room. It wasn't. He looked back at me. This isn't the time for this, he said. We can talk about anything later. Right now, they need the payment released. Need. I nodded once, acknowledging the word without agreeing to it. They need it, I said. Yes. Another pause. He shifted his weight slightly, lowering his voice just enough to keep the conversation contained between us. You're holding up the entire event, he added. People are starting to notice. I let my gaze move briefly past him, taking in the room as it had become. The slowed service. The subtle tension. The questions that no one was asking out loud. Yes, I said. They are. He exhaled, not loudly, but with enough weight to show that his patience was thinning. Then fix it, he said. Simple. Direct. Expected. I looked at him for a moment longer before answering. I already did. The words landed quietly between us. He frowned, just slightly. That's not fixing it, he said. That's causing it. Is it? I asked. Again, not confrontational. Just clear. He didn't answer immediately, because the moment had shifted. Not in volume. Not in visibility. But in meaning. Behind him, I saw my daughter-in-law step closer, no longer willing to remain at a distance. She didn't interrupt, but she didn't stay back either. Her presence alone added pressure to the space between us. Can we not do this right now? She said, her voice controlled, but tighter than before. Whatever this is, it's unnecessary. Unnecessary. The word felt familiar. I turned my head slightly, acknowledging her without fully shifting my attention away from my son. Unnecessary, I repeated. She held my gaze. Yes, she said. It's a misunderstanding at best, and at worst, it's just creating a problem where there shouldn't be one. A misunderstanding. I let that settle. Then, slowly, I reached up. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just enough to draw their attention. My fingers touched the edge of the name tag, holding it lightly between them before lifting it just a fraction forward. Not removing it. Just making it visible. Clearly. Deliberately. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. They were reading it. Not for the first time, but perhaps for the first time fully. The old lady paying for everything, I said quietly. No change in tone. No added weight. Just the words. As they were written. As they had been intended. As they had been displayed for everyone else to see. I lowered my hand, letting the tag rest back against my chest. I thought it was accurate. I continued. A brief silence followed. Not empty, but full of recognition. My son's expression shifted again, something closer to realization settling in. Not complete, not comfortable, but present. My daughter-in-law's posture stiffened, her composure holding, but only just. It was a joke, she said. Softer this time. Less certain. Was it? I asked. The same question as before. But now, it carried something different. Not curiosity. Clarity. Neither of them answered. Because there was nothing left to explain. Nothing left to soften. Nothing left to reframe. Everything that needed to be understood already had been. I let the silence sit for a moment longer before speaking again. I paid for everything, I said. Up until now. No emphasis. No accusation. Just a statement. And now, my son asked. The question came quickly, almost automatically, as if he needed to hear the answer spoken out loud. I met his gaze. Steady. Calm. Now, I said, I've stopped. Another pause. This one longer. He looked at me, really looked this time, not as part of the background, not as someone nearby, but as the person standing in front of him. And for the first time that evening, he didn't have an immediate response. Because the moment had finally reached a point where it couldn't be redirected, couldn't be minimized, couldn't be dismissed as a joke. It was exactly what it was, and nothing else. For a moment, no one said anything. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law, not even the room. Because even though the music was still playing, even though people were still talking, still moving, still trying to hold the evening together, something had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. My son glanced back toward the main table, then toward the event manager, who was now standing still for the first time all evening, her attention fixed, waiting for direction she couldn't give on her own. Then he looked at me again. "Mom," he started, his voice lower now, less certain. "We can fix this. Just release the payment. We'll talk about everything else later." Later. I held that word for a second. Then I nodded slightly. "I'm sure we could," I said. Because we could. That had never been the issue. Across from us, my daughter-in-law took a small step forward, her tone softer now, more careful. "It wasn't meant the way you're taking it," she said. "The tag, it was just something light. People laughed, that's all. It wasn't supposed to mean anything." I finished for her. She hesitated. Just for a second. And that was enough. I didn't press further. I didn't need to. Because meaning doesn't come from intention alone. It comes from repetition, from pattern, from what is allowed to continue. I turned my head slightly, letting my gaze move across the room one last time. The slowed service. The quiet confusion. The guests pretending not to notice, while noticing everything. The main table, no longer effortless, no longer untouched. And then, finally, my granddaughter. She was no longer laughing. No longer leaning into easy conversation. She was watching. Not the room. Not the staff. Me. There was no accusation in her expression. No anger. Just something quieter. Something searching. As if she was trying to understand how the day she had imagined had arrived here. I held her gaze for a brief moment. Long enough to acknowledge her. Short enough not to pull her further into something that didn't belong to her. Then I looked back at my son. "You're right," I said calmly. "We can talk about this later." Relief moved across his face too quickly to hide. A solution. A way forward. Something that would restore the evening back to what it was supposed to be. But not tonight. I added. The relief paused. Not gone. Just interrupted. "Tonight," I continued, "everything is exactly as it's been presented." Neither of them spoke. Because they understood. Maybe not everything. But enough. I reached up again, this time not to adjust the name tag, but to remove it. Slowly. Carefully. The pin came free with a soft, almost unnoticeable sound. I held the small piece of card between my fingers for a moment, looking at it one last time. The old lady paying for everything. A simple sentence. Clear. Efficient. Accurate. Until it wasn't. I stepped forward, closing the small distance between us, and placed the name tag gently into my son's hand. No force. No emphasis. Just returning it. "You should update this," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Because the moment carried enough weight on its own. He looked down at it. His expression unreadable now. The certainty from earlier replaced by something far less defined. Behind him, my daughter-in-law said nothing. For once. Nothing to reframe. Nothing to soften. Nothing to correct. I let my hand fall back to my side. There was nothing else to add. Nothing else to explain. Because everything that needed to be understood already had been. I turned then. Not abruptly. Not as an exit meant to be noticed. Just a quiet decision, carried out without hesitation. Step by step, I walked toward the doors of the reception hall, the sound of the evening continuing behind me. Music, voices, movement. All still there. All still functioning, just slightly out of rhythm. Not broken. Not ruined. Just changed. As I reached the doors, I paused for a fraction of a second, my hand resting lightly against the handle. Not to reconsider. Just to mark the moment. Then I stepped outside. The air was cooler. Quieter. Real. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight that had settled throughout the day finally begin to lift. Not all at once. Not completely. But enough. Enough to stand differently. Enough to move forward without carrying what no longer belonged to me. Behind me, the celebration continued. In front of me, silence. Clarity. And something far more valuable than either of them had offered me that evening. Respect. Not given. Not requested. Simply kept.